I'm actually going to before you start If I can have your attention just for a second, we're letting you sort of wander in. The day and the rain has been probably damaging and people getting motivated. So to start with you all, we'll take about 5 minutes to sort of let whoever still wants to come and we'll get the panel situated and then we'll get underway. Okay? We would ask maybe let the director come in to balance it out so that we're not talking to empty seats and we're not sort of all over here. Okay, thanks again. Here's all your notes, by the way. I don't think you need them. I have some money for this like you, so feel free to fill it out for yourself. I don't know if you got this. Some people give me, some people haven't. So this is all the answers here. So we do it informally. You guys, unless you want to write something real quick, but it's up to you. You're not alone. Don't worry.
Private time is ready in event.
We're coming next week.
Excellent. Well, before all of you leave, you'll need to sign your CMF release.
Okay.
I was in Thursdays a few Thursdays ago when you testified. I was sitting over to the side, didn't get a chance to say hello, but I was there. Oh, wonderful. It's marvelous that you're involved in this.
Highlight people's activities in the local and campus community and get them connected in ways that hopefully will allow them to build towards more media and more activism and more awareness. Your participation is a big part of that, and subsequently we're hoping at the end of this to have you raise some questions or discuss some of the issues that the panelists will raise, and perhaps even take us into a new direction. Well, let me first introduce all the panelists. I'm Michael Lasky. I'm working in the Department of Media Studies and Video Media Studies, Health Communication. Our distinguished first speaker, who will actually be sort of a regular speaker this time around, and there's no presentation, a formal presentation, is Ben Scott. He's the Policy Director for Free Press, which is a national nonpartisan organization working to increase informed public participation, inclusion, media policy debate. And is hoping to generate policies that will produce more competitive and public interest-oriented media system with a strong non-profit and non-commercial sector. That is the policy team in Washington is dedicated to monitoring and analyzing media policy making to increase public awareness and participation. For Free Press, he worked with Bernie Sanders in the U.S. House of Representatives to develop public policy, and he's in the final stages of participation in research. What I'd like to do is I'll introduce the panelists. And then what we will do is we will open up each of them to 10 to 12 minutes to explain a little bit about what they do, what their interests, what their concerns, what they're engaged in, as an introduction for a larger panel discussion. Ben will then present something a little bit to sort of put a framework around it, and the hope is we'll have it So, as is to be expected, there are times we come prepared and sometimes we don't. I have been running ragged. We don't have everything that we prepared. So I don't have files for everybody. That's the theme. We'll be informal here. So what I'll do is I'll ask the panelists to have my files to introduce themselves on their own, and then I'll take up those that I have. So our first will be Elizabeth Gorham, and she is on the State College Borough Town Council.
Yeah. State College Borough Council. Let me just ask, how many people who have lived here less than, say, 15 years? Me too. Then we're on the same side. I mean, we have an understanding. We have the same, maybe we share an understanding of what this place is. I moved here, and I was an activist in Houston, Texas. And as I recently heard from Linda Ellerby, who I think is a brilliant speaker, she said that when everything changed doesn't mean that everything is different. And that's a powerful phrase that's been running through my mind lately. I ran for office as an activist because my husband encouraged me to simply introduce environmental concerns in a local election, and they weren't being discussed. Back in 1997, right after I got here, and I found I really enjoyed going door to door. I loved campaigning. It gave me something to do, and it really connected me to the community. At that time, it was assumed that it was a point of pride to spend nothing on your campaign, to have no yard signs, and to do as little as possible, thereby giving the impression that your people's awareness of your exceptional character rises you into public office. Well, I had yard signs. I spent money. I went door to door, and by gosh, I beat an incumbent. And I was so full of myself that I thought, I was here. I'm going to rule. And the very first lesson is, as an activist and as a politician activist, is that It needs 4 votes to do anything, not just one. But I had a lot of people connected to me and me to them in the neighborhoods, and the first big fight was about a zoning issue that was going to allow high buildings in the Highlands along Pew, along Allen, and we organized block by block. We really got organized. We went out, we got petitions. We just tried to ram it through. We thought the public would speak. We knew what people wanted, and undeniably people did want to retain the human scale of our buildings. We lost. I was shocked how coolly received our petitions were by the rest of council. Really shocked. I thought it was going to be a no-brainer. And that's when it was a big mistake on my part, a big mistake, to try and force issues. This is central Pennsylvania. But one by one, we're sort of the yeast in the dough and shifting awareness, opening eyes, and bringing in new ideas. But this is a very conservative place where new ideas are not welcome. And a place right here, which generates new ideas, is pretty suspicious at times. Up the college is not a place where they really think of themselves at home. But it's important. It's important to realize what good people there are throughout the county, and it's wonderful to be here in this beautiful, natural setting that is piece by piece being gobbled up and paved over and sold. And my real intent of speaking today is to enlist your help in a few issues that I think are extremely important to the future of living here, the future of our country, the future of our natural environment. Now, how's that for? I wrote down a lot of things here, so I wouldn't miss being able to tell you some of the things, some of my hard-won lessons. I have 2 equations, 2 political equations for you, both as in politics. I have wrote down, Michael sent me an email and I wrote down in big letters, running for office. How can you influence people in elected office? How does the media influence politicians, and how do politicians influence the media? And it's all going on, but there's more than that. There's a well, as you know, we all know that it's an organic mix, and as the world changes, so does activism, so does the media, so does politics. But even though everything's changed, doesn't mean everything is different. Which means the same elements prevail. We're all human beings. We all have the pretty desires for our lives and for our surroundings. My 2 equations, 2 political equations. One is I learned from a city council member in Houston, and it's that on every vote that we take, there's a third and a third and a third, an equation that we do mentally. 1/3 about what is the right thing to do. 1/3, what do the power interests want? And 1/3, what do the people want? And there's sort of an unconscious weighing. And also, which part of the equation you feel most strongly about. So I think that's something that you need to keep in mind when you influence elected officials. I'm trying to find my other equation. I've lost my other equation. Well, I'll find it here somewhere. Too bad. When I remember it, when I find it, I will share it with you. Oh, it's for any vote you need 4, and that's important to remember, because sometimes getting 3 may be easy, but getting that 4th one is really hard. Now, how do you influence elected officials? Elected officials are sort of a breed apart. And someone once said, and I think it's true, I'm unfortunately finding it true, the longer you are in politics, and I think as an activist too, the longer you are an activist, the more acquaintances, maybe this is not true for activists, but for politicians it's true. The longer you're in politics, the more acquaintances and fewer friends you have. And that is really a fact of life. It touches me to say that, but it is absolutely true. Because you live a life that is always, you're always working something, always. Like it or not, you become, your life just sort of becomes like the queen bee. You are responsible to the entire town, or wherever you are, wherever you represent, and you need to listen. You have to listen. That's your job, to listen and interact with people. And people watch you all the time, and people comment, and it influences. It influences. One of the advantages of running for office here, and I think you should all run for office, and I'm serious about that. I think you should all run for office. It's thrilling, and it's also very educational. But running for office, and I've lost my train of thought again. Running for office acquaints you with the vast spectrum of what people want from their elected officials and what elected officials want from the public. Some people think they're elected to use their own opinion and don't need to consult with the electorate. You elected me, good. I'm in charge of my vote, and I'll use my best judgment and my own instincts. That's who you elected, so I will use it on your behalf. Other people think, at the other end of the spectrum, and that's where I tend to fall, feel I need to consult on every darn thing. I want you to know everything. I want to have a dialogue. I want you to come to council. I want you to demand. I want you to tell me what you want. I want to tell you how I feel. I want a dialogue with the citizens. And that's more difficult to have, especially since we don't all agree with each other. But it's important to have the dialogue, because you can have great influence even though we may not agree. Because that one-third. You can win. It's amazing what you can win. I lost that big zoning vote, but I've won other ones. We have downtown recycling, on-street recycling. That was one of my minor victories, but I feel good about that. We're going to be, the Borough of State College is going to be the subject of a greenhouse gas emissions study. We're going to do an inventory. The university is going to do an inventory of the borough and our greenhouse gas emissions. I think that is a major victory. I am so delighted. I'd like you to be involved. Not this semester as they count it up, but next semester and next semester when we put together an implementation strategy and we start wanting to inform people how they can reduce their emissions, how easily they can reduce emissions, and the government needs to take a leading role. Help me demand that. Okay, I don't want to talk too long. Let me just say how you can, I just say to influence an elected official, come talk to us. Come talk to us and help us make it a win-win situation. So you don't try to ram something down the electorate's vote or the council's throat, because you can't do it. We get rebuffed. I get rebuffed. But we can work together. And if elected officials welcome your participation. And we're hungry for interaction, especially with people with all the great ideas and energy from the university. We need to work together a lot more. 70% of all of the people who live in the borough are students. We need more. The students need to demand that the borough provide more services for them. Why don't we? We don't. One of the things I'd like to do is to provide a tenant-landlord dispute resolution service that's independent of the university and the town, that would provide real service to students, because I think we're setting a bad example and we're encouraging bad behavior by some of the ways in which students are treated. And students are driving us nuts this year with 2,000 freshmen looking for free beer in my neighborhood and peeing in my bushes when they get it. But work with us. We want it. And now how elected officials can influence media. Well, media is entertainment, as you know. They're looking for sound bites. They're looking for information. They're looking for stories. Cindy Hahn can tell you one that was created just last night. So media is hungry for information, but they also have their own sense of things. I can tell whether the CDT agrees with me by the picture they run. I know they don't agree with me. I'll welcome your questions later. I'm sorry I have more to say than time to say it, but it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Nancy Kranich. She serves as convener of the local Bill of Rights Defense Committee, which successfully passed the State College Bill of Rights Safe Zone Resolution in February 2006. She's also the treasurer of the Center County Democrats and chair of Steering Committee of the Public Issues Forums of Center County. Before coming to State College 2 years ago, Nancy served as president of the American Library Association, associate dean of libraries at New York University, and an activist on national and local information and media policy issues. Please welcome Nancy Kranich.
Well, first, I can't tell you how delighted I am to be among this panel, especially somebody like Elizabeth, who has been such a great resource for me to learn how to pull all the ropes here at State College. And I'm particularly delighted to be here in the library. I know there's a few librarians here. Yay. How many librarians do we have? Let's see. I see at least 2. Great. Well, I know that most of you are probably thinking, why is there a librarian on this panel? Aren't the librarians the ones that are real quiet? Well, in fact, some people have discovered recently that librarians aren't so quiet, and I will tell you, for at least the last century, we haven't been so quiet, but people are just starting to realize it. I got my start in being an activist, not at the local level, but at the national level. And I get to spend my time with Congress. And I started working on issues in the 1980s about government secrecy, openness, transparency issues. And we were dealing with just about what we're dealing with now. So what we learn is everything is cyclical, so don't think you're ever finished with your work. But back in the 1980s, we wanted free access to government information. They told us we were going to break the back of the U.S. government, and that we were left-wing loony librarians for thinking of such. But today, you have free access to government information thanks to people in this room, the librarians. And you take it for granted, but we did a real uphill battle, and I will tell you, we learned a lot doing that. We learned that we could do all we wanted to say everything wrong with access to government information. I will tell you today, I just got another update. They have closed 3 EPA libraries, or are trying to close down all access to environmental information. I mean, they are doing it more and more. So we put the plugs in back in the 80s, by the early 90s, but it's back again. So we learned that things are very cyclical, unfortunately. We also learned a lot of other things during our work to open up the government, which is definitely a work in progress here. One of the things I learned the most, though, was we can be eternally vigilant. Librarians, we like to document things, we like to have access and show you all this information. But it's what we do with it, not just collecting it, that's important. And what we discovered is we can point out all the problems, but until we become proposers rather than opposers, we are not framing the issues. We need to be the ones framing the issues, not just saying what's wrong. And we need to be the ones taking our values, our core values, which are American values, and putting them right up front. So I learned it's easy to oppose, but a lot harder to propose. But I will tell you, when we proposed a bill to give free access to government information, when everybody told us we could never do it, we got so many people on board, and people, including people like Newt Gingrich, who loves librarians, lots of Republicans, not just Democrats. This was not a Democrat-Republican issue. But once we framed the issue, everybody said, and we were the people to beat. So, going from lots of other national issues that I worked on, including telecommunications, digital divide, filtering the internet. I went all the way to the Supreme Court on that one, and porn in libraries. I came here finally, and went from being a national advocate to a local advocate. Now, things are very different on the local level, I discovered. One of the things that I talked a lot about and wrote a lot about is how important local activism is and civic engagement. And I do a whole lot of work in promoting civic engagement, and some of our civic engagement champions are here today. But I came from New York City, and it was a lot easier to talk about being engaged than being engaged. So I came to State College, and I literally did get engaged to my husband, who spoke last night, but also to this community, because I came to a community where people are engaged. I stood up and I spoke at a meeting about the Patriot Act, something near and dear to librarians' hearts. You remember about that time, in 2004, is when John Ashcroft called the librarians hysterical and that we'd been duped by the ACLU. And shortly after, we found an email message from some FBI officials calling us radical militant librarians. Now, I'm sure this isn't the image you have of librarians, but it is a way to get people active and certainly shows the concern. Well, certainly the librarians were concerned about the Patriot Act because of wanting to protect the privacy of our users, privacy we protect every day in every way, not just from the FBI. So the issue for librarians was passionate. I went to a group, talked about it. Whenever I go to talk, I'd like to not just tell you what the problem is, but I'd like to suggest some ways that we can become active. So I suggested that we form a local committee to pass a Bill of Rights Safe Zone resolution because we'd not passed one. Sounds like a great idea, right? Several of my committee members are in this room. Well, it was a wonderful way for me, brand new to State College, to get to know this community. So at one of the first meetings, public meetings I went to, which was a controversy over naming the library, the mayor was there. So I went up to the mayor and I told him what I was interested in, and he proceeded to tell me every reason why they didn't pass one of these resolutions once before and his problems with it. So that gave me a lot to work with, knowing what the opposition was about and who the opposition was. So many of you, we got together, we formed a committee. We formed a committee of likely and not so likely coalitions, people who represented different walks. We put together a plan. And then we found our friend Elizabeth Gorham and others on the council. Once we were ready to go, we really did work our council members, and Elizabeth and I were on the phone every minute that last weekend before the vote. She kept saying to me, Nancy, if you don't pull this off, and the key was, how do we get the public behind this issue? And we did. We put out the word, we used our electronic, different networks, but what happened was, I think, more than just getting the word out, is people started to realize that this was an issue that affected them in their local community. What's the difference between what happens in Washington or in Guantanamo and what happens in your local community? So people got galvanized because they realized this hit home. We did our homework, we got people there. For those of you who weren't there, how many of you were there? It was definitely a great night for the Bill of Rights and for American values. We packed the council chamber, and we got people to speak. Some people, we knew what they were going to say, but others spoke from their hearts. And what they talked about was how important democracy is to them. And every single story was more moving than the next. I mean, we tried to stage this, but we didn't have to stage this. Because when you stamp on and trample people's basic rights, people are willing to stand up and say why it's so important. So it was a marvelous night for the First Amendment, for our rights in general, and for civic engagement here in State College. And I can't thank those of you who helped so much. It was definitely exactly what Elizabeth talked about. You got to have 4 votes. We didn't know if we were going to have 2 votes. We finally got all the votes. The mayor didn't have a vote on this one. He just used the newspaper to sort of undermine our vote. But we finally got all our votes because we got people out. We got people to speak up, and it was pretty hard to say no to people talking about their sons going to Iraq. Another person, a student here, talking about growing up in Saudi Arabia and what that meant to them. And the stories went on and on. They were very moving. So what did I learn on the way to being engaged? Well, first and foremost, you got to be passionate about concerns. If you're passionate, if you care about the environment, if you care about civil liberties, if you care about these issues, it really translates and makes a difference. It's also really important to know what the opposition thinks. I mean, the mayor gave me a slate that night, something that I knew what the opposition was. find out who's opposed and why. It's real easy to be with those that you agree with, but it's much more important to find out where that opposition is. Who are these people? Why do they believe what they believe? And how do we work with them? We don't work just with the ones that agree with us. Use these opportunities to educate. Most people don't know very much about these issues, and we all learn a lot by doing it. But also learn how to tell your story and make it a local story. You know, one of the things that I learned in Washington even is that when you tell the story about your issues, it plays much better when it's a local issue. When you talk to your local congressman, if you can say what's going on here in State College rather than what's going on, you know, in Europe, in Iraq, or in Guantanamo, it makes a huge difference. You've got to galvanize public support and tell that story in a way that you have a unified message. One of the things I think that activists tend to do, they tend to be very active, but they don't tend to make sure that they do their politics at home before they get to the ballot box. And that means you got to work out a lot of politics within your group before you go public. And we're not going to agree on a lot of things. You think people are on the same side? That's not necessarily true. And so I always tell the library community, if all 65,000 members of the American Library Association can agree on something, we're formidable. Our biggest weakness is when we don't come to that political stance together and take a unified position. And that's a lot of political action you have to take internally before you get to the final votes. So let me close in saying that I think the greatest threat we have today is not those guys in Washington. We don't have to name names. It's silence. It's not speaking up. It's not being active. One of the people who trains moderators for our public issues forums likes to talk about the Greek word for idiot. That word comes from someone who doesn't speak out in public or a private person. That's an idiot. So if you let others speak and not yourself, then in fact you probably are an idiot. So if you don't speak out, someone else will. I assure you that you're not going to always have a unified voice, but if we don't work together in an organized way to make change, we're going to allow those other idiots to do it for us. So thank you.
Our next speaker is Cynthia Hahn. She's the Executive Director of CNET, who, by the way, have recorded our events yesterday and are recording them currently. They'll be shown over the next 3 weeks, and I hope we can get the information out to you so you'll be able to maybe revisit this with others who weren't able to be here. She is the Executive Director of CNET, the Government and Education Access Network for Centre County. CNET is a member of the National Alliance for Community Media and has been active in opposing both the national and statewide legislation regarding cable television and video franchising. Please welcome Cynthia Hahn.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for the invitation to be here today. I'm really quite honored. Everybody else was asking, was taking a poll, so I'm going to take a poll too. How many people in the room know what CNET is? Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. In terms of definition, CNET is the Government and Education Access Network for Centre County. And access programming is really very different than anything else that you will find on TV. I attended the first session in the symposium yesterday, and one of the things, there was a lot of talk about the internet and the legislation going on in Washington and going on in the state level. And one of the things that was said was that if there is no provision for net neutrality, that the internet could end up looking like cable TV, which is very, very true, because in theoretically, Comcast and the cable companies and the telcos could control what it is you get on the internet, and it could look like cable TV, except that that's not completely true, because Comcast or Adelphia and the media corporations and the cable companies cannot control what your local government and your local educational entities want to be on your local access stations. And that is why organizations like CNET are so important. We provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of lots of boring stuff. Elizabeth takes part in much of the boring stuff. The staff at CNET likes to joke about the fact of how many hours we can listen to debates about the width of sidewalks. And sometimes it really does get that monotonous. However, there are also things on CNET like this event, like, dare I say it, the State College Area School District meetings, which can be quite interesting. We cover local sporting events, local concerts, events like Memorial Day in Boalsburg. We are community programming for the county. Now, something very interesting, I've only had this job 9 months. Thanks to people like Justin Baker, who's sitting in the back of the room, who will not raise his hand, I have been able to do this job. But before coming to CNET, I was one of those people that took CNET for granted. You know, I knew that if I turned on my TV on the first and third Monday of every month at 7:30, I was going to get to watch my local government in action. Never knew that there was any real threat to that, to being able to watch my local government in action, till I assumed this position. And then I found out that, lo and behold, there is legislation on the federal level and legislation on the state level that really threatens access. It threatens access in a couple of very important ways. One way is that it provides no money for us. And that's real important. We are funded primarily through what are called franchise fees that the providers pay to the local municipalities. And the local municipalities may choose whether or not to fund us or not. They certainly do not have to. CNET is funded by 4 very kind municipalities: State College Borough, Harris Township, Patton Township, College Township. We're also funded by county government, but none of those entities need to fund us. And that makes our existence a little tentative. There is currently no money in the statewide franchising bill set aside for access programming, for us to buy equipment, for us to pay our staff. And so access truly is threatened. The second problem with the legislation that's going on, and I know everybody talked a lot about the legislation yesterday in terms of net neutrality, but there are very few provisions in the bill to guarantee build-out. And why is that important? It's important because right now, people who live in the borough of State College can see their local government in action, but 65% of, say, Half Moon Township cannot, because the cable companies have not billed out to Half Moon Township. Those people cannot see their local government in action. So build out is tremendously important. As I've become involved in this debate, and as I said, I've only been involved in the debate for about 9 months, there's a few things that I have learned that may be obvious to all of you but are not obvious to me. One was I needed to get specific. I couldn't just spend my time railing against every provision in both the federal and the state bill. I had to kind of pick and choose. So I think one piece of advice or one tack that I would advise to all of you is get specific. If your issue is going to be the environment, and I think a lot of people feel passionately about the environment, get more specific than that. Is it going to be wildlife preservation? Is it going to be wetlands? Is it going to be rainforests? Get specific and choose something that you really, truly care about. Another piece of advice is to be realistic about your goals. I may truly dislike the statewide video franchise legislation, but there is a good possibility that it's going to be reality sometime next year. If the goal is to just shut down the legislation completely, we may not succeed. perhaps the goal should be to make the legislation better. Perhaps the goal should be to be more realistic about what is likely to happen and make that piece of legislation as good as it can possibly be. Get built out in the legislation. Get some dedicated money for access channels. One thing I just want to briefly touch on is the fact that Center County does not currently have public access. We have government and educational access, but we do not have public access. And what that means is that although a lot of the programming that you will find on CNET may look like public access, it's really not. The public does not have the opportunity to put what it wants on its local stations. And so this is an issue that I hope to see public access in this community before long. And I think that as a university town, that is something that many people in this room, in the College of Communications, and across the county should be willing to fight for. And so I certainly hope that that's something that will be seen shortly. Thank you.
The next speaker is Kevin Hagopian. He's a senior lecturer in media studies. His PhD in communications at Wisconsin with a specialty in film studies. His current research analyzes the Hollywood cinema of the late 30s and World War II years, his institutional advertising for the film industry, as a semi-official national cultural voice, and he has been the voice of introduction in many ways to the very reason why we're having this symposium today and our informal discussions over coffee. I'm pleased to welcome my colleague, Kevin.
Thanks very much, Michael. Actually, I'm very much the rookie here in terms of activism of all kinds, not just media activism, but activism in general. And as I look around, not only the panel, Elizabeth and Nancy and Susan and Joel, and as I look out in the audience, Art Goldschmidt, I see Susan, Joe, many others, Paul, Peter, and a room full, Brenda Black in the back there, all of whom have struck remarkable success and displayed remarkable energy as activists here in their local community. This is actually, as I say, a new thing for me. I'm beginning, what I see myself doing is beginning to transform myself from a very generic academic into an academic / activist. And that's really what I'd like to talk about today. I'd like to offer some impressions of that transformation to all of you, because we do live and work here in a community that is determined by the rhythms of the academic school year and by the textures of academic employment, even if you are not directly associated with the university. And many of you are, graduate students, faculty, staff members. So what I'd like to do is sort of chart my own progress in the direction from academics to academic / activism. And especially I'd like to talk about that first stage of activism, that moment when you transform yourself from a spectator of a political system to a person who seeks to insert yourself into that system, to begin to influence it. My own move toward activism started with, I think, with a level of dissatisfaction about what I was getting politically from my position as an academic. I was growing more and more sensitive to politics because of my research in the historical politics of American culture, but I didn't think I was having any particular measurable effect on the political sphere, other than periodically exhorting my students kind of vaguely to uphold their responsibilities in the local political sphere. What those responsibilities were, other than voting, I wasn't exactly sure because I wasn't living them. And as I thought about the reasons how I'd come to this stage of my life without being able to say that I was living my political ideals, I went back to the person that I once was. My first political experience was as a boy campaign worker in the McGovern campaign. I understand that in the very heavily Republican district that I'm from near Chicago, that I still hold the record for 14-year-old boys with the largest number of doors slammed in their faces and obscenities shouted at them. What had happened between that time of energetic local involvement and today, and I think a lot of it has to do with the nature of the academic enterprise. Here in academia, we're very much engaged in virtual communities. That's been historically true. Our connections, our loyalties, our relationships are away from and out of our local communities. They are to our disciplines, to our professional organizations. We may have people that we call colleagues who, in my case, they're at places like Flinders University in Australia, or New York University, or Berkeley, or wherever. I have too many colleagues, potential colleagues here at Penn State who I don't even know yet. I'm closer in some ways to people thousands of miles away. The mechanisms of academia allow for what sociologists would call a cool commitment. That is, one that's characterized by kind of clinical and objective and analytical attachments and a certain ironic distance from actual political activity. In a lot of ways, that's good. It makes us very cosmopolitan. It allows us to bring to our host universities that international kind of network. In fact, it's not surprising that e-culture grew out of the academic research environment. And as I say, there's good reason for this definition of community. A scholar named Brian Turner has said, quote, "Modern societies probably need cool cosmopolitans with ironic vocabularies if they are to avoid the conflagration of nationalistic versions of political authenticity and membership." But for me, cool communities, like the ones that Brian Turner talks about, are also gated communities of the mind, in which we only encounter those we have destined ourselves to encounter. Further, as e-contact becomes more and more regular and omnipresent, the basic way of doing social business, it seems to me that as it replaces hot commitments of actual human presence, ironically, those hot commitments become more unique and therefore more valuable politically. Ask any elected official, and this goes back to something that Ben said the other night, which is more persuasive, 100,000 emails or 10 in-person visits to a congressional office by an articulate constituent? And the answer is going to be those 10 visits. I slowly came to the realization that I didn't just live in State College, I was a citizen here in two ways. First, literally, I drank the water, I breathed the air, I walked the streets, and so local governance governed me whether I consented or not. And second, and more important, morally, I could not espouse a politically engaged view of culture and the media in the classroom without starting to live those ideals. So I looked for an experience in actual politics that would start to discharge what I was feeling were my responsibilities to my actual community, and a setting in which I would learn some tools of organizing. I wanted to do something which would take advantage of the technical skills that I had in organizing educational experiences. I've been a teacher for many, many years. But also one that would allow me to learn something about my real community, not just State College, but the county and the region beyond State College. And finally, I also wanted a political structure that could imagine itself as a governing force, not merely as an idealistic rhetorical foil at election time. Because the day after the election, foil or no foil, real people were going to govern and be governed. Translation, no more Ralph Nader. Third, media and cultural studies had given me enough, theoretically and philosophically, to say no to, and an excellent framework to say no in. I wanted something to say yes to. I discovered that hot commitments to local politics are becoming, to some extent, an endangered species. A small fraction of our citizens vote in local and national elections, and students are almost completely disinterested in political affairs, in national political affairs particularly, but locally even more so. As cultural studies has shown, they feel that their questions of political representation are better enacted in the cultural sphere of personal style rather than the agora of public activity. I found local politics, at least in my party, to be primarily a social setting, with a small group of longtime party loyalists getting together to socialize, govern the informal structure of the party, and raise a small amount of funds among one another for limited and apolitical electioneering. Simply put, my partner Rhonda and I wanted to bring politics back to a political party, and we wanted to do it in a very self-serving way, as an educational tool for us, not because we felt we were particularly bright and innovative and knowledgeable, but in a sense we wanted to bring politics to us as well. I got involved in some fairly conventional political activity based on hot commitments, including helping students organize and turn out an epical registration and voting effort here in the borough in 2004. And if you're a staff member or a teacher here at Penn State and you've ever found yourself rolling your eyes and complaining about students, if you had been at a polling place that night in the Vero neighborhood of State College and seen students waiting in the rain for 2 hours to vote, you would hesitate to reflexively damn them again. I will never be prouder of our students and of our community than I was that night. My wife and I are now precinct committee persons in charge of a group of more than 50 volunteers who each talk to 4 or 5 of their immediate neighbors who are registered in our political party, reminding them about voting day, where and when it is. Every registered Democrat in our precinct is reached this way, and only in person, only through a hot commitment approach, through no phone calls and no emails. Probably the most important thing that my partner Rhonda and I have done is to organize a series of informational breakfasts. For the last 2 years, we've been doing this every month, all at several locations around the county. The total attendance of those at those over the past 2 years has been between 1,000 and 1,500 people. One of the things that we've done is to try and consciously link Penn State talent intellectually with the rest of the community. We've taken up subjects as diverse as media activism, Social Security reform, the immigration debate, the Pennsylvania debate over creationism, Pennsylvania environmental initiatives, affordable housing in Center County, organic farming and food policy, the New Deal and the history of the Democratic Party, student activism, and the future of the party. We've met everywhere from country clubs to small-town Lions clubs. At our next breakfast, we'll hear from a group called Concerned Voters of Center County, a group who has been exceptionally effective in keeping alive the question of voting machine integrity. We don't want to be the next Florida. We're now looking at sessions on the Iraq War with veterans as speakers. The breakfasts for us have been a gathering place for like-minded people, and their indirect effects have been that they've been a place for the recruitment of volunteers for a lot of causes and for broad coalition building. Using basic e-technologies like email, listservs, blogs, and web pages, they've been at the heart of establishing, I think, a web of progressive communication in this community. The lessons for me, actually, have been quite clear. First, take charge and initiate action. Don't wait for someone to tell you what you can and can't do. Be an active activist. Second, use the values of education to help create a public sphere where none had, in places where none has existed before. That's the thing that we all have in common is our belief in the power of education. A third thing, I've complained about the tendency toward socializing in local political activity, and I don't want for a moment to suggest that that's a bad thing. Quite the contrary. I think it's really important in the work that you do to provide a setting in which social and ideological values can come together. Those hot commitments are nurtured by the cool rhetoric and idea manufacturing of the world that I'm used to in my virtual community of academia, but they're made real through the hot commitment of individual connection and socializing. Paul Kleppner, in his 1982 book, Who Voted, talked about, he sort of looked back romantically and nostalgically to the 19th century when political participation in America was much higher. And he looked back then to say that it seemed to him that, quote, politics were not complex then. They were not intangible and remote, but they were simple, concrete, and directly related to the concerns of daily life. That's been our goal in those breakfasts, is to make tangible and to make real and to make local political questions, to turn local political spectators into local political activists. If you're an academic, there's no longer any time to lose. There's no longer any opportunity for excuses. We have a body of theoretical and philosophical knowledge and social science information that makes us well prepared to make change in this world. Jacques Maritain said that the fear of soiling ourselves by entering the context of history is not virtue, but a way of escaping virtue. History is made locally as well as globally, as countless environmental and political activists here in Pennsylvania and in communities all over the nation have shown. It's important, I think, to balance virtual community with actual community, to balance hot commitments with our traditional cool commitments, and to use the internet and inexpensive media technologies to enhance the link between hot and cool political commitments. It seems to me that the use of each of those together magnifies the effect that each has. I think it's also important for those of us who are academics to get the quotes out from around the word activism. We understand activism and reform to be discourses and therefore subject to analysis and subject to criticism. But we have to understand that at the same time that they are subject to criticism and analysis, that they also are about the lives of real people. That's why after all these years I'm very much in agreement with Nancy and with our other speakers. I would much rather have, and this is in contradiction to my graduate education, to the idea of politics that was implanted in me then, I would much rather have a bite of that apple than take a chance on someday, 50 or 100 years from now, getting the whole apple, because by then the apple's going to be rotten anyway. I'd like to close by reminding myself and urging all of us who teach and work in this large field of culture, and that's almost everybody in the social sciences and humanities here at Penn State, faculty and graduate students, that by virtue of what we teach and what we research, we have no choice but to be activists. To do otherwise would be unethical. It reminds me of the great gospel singer Mahalia Jackson used to say, one of her songs was called, "I want to live the life I sing about in my songs." And I think that's what we have to do. Michael, thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Susan Aram. She's a professional freelance writer who specializes in membership and donor materials for unions and nonprofits. Much of her life she's been actively involved in the labor movement, detailed in her book Labor Pains, Inside America's New Union Movement, on Monthly Review Press. She's also co-authored 3 other books. For the last 2 years, and this is how you may know her informally, she has served as the volunteer managing editor of Voices of Central Pennsylvania. She has brought a number of copies for those of you who may not be familiar with it, and we'll put those up. It's basically an all-volunteer monthly community newspaper that was founded in response to a conservative newspaper called The Lion-Hearted. While The Lion-Hearted is long gone, Voices hasn't missed an issue in 13 years of publication. Please help me welcome Susan.
No one should have to follow Kevin Hagopian. It's kind of the State College version of following Jesse Jackson or something. I don't have written comments, and I don't have a whole lot of theory. As a matter of fact, I'm terribly humbled by this group, because most of the people in this room over the age of 22, and a fair number under the age of 22, have or are volunteering for Voices right now. So I'm not exactly sure why I'm the one here, except that Michael needed a victim. So I will tell you the story. My heart for many years was in Iowa City. Do any of you know Iowa City at all? University of Iowa. It's a very progressive town. It's a town where if you're a racist or a bigot of any kind, you really don't feel like you belong there. If you're a Christian fundamentalist, you don't feel like you belong there. If you're a very wealthy businessman, or if you're a doctor who makes a whole lot of money off of poor people, you don't feel comfortable living in Iowa City. You might live there, but you don't feel comfortable about it. And in Iowa City, there was a newspaper called The Icon, which was a lot like Voices, except better in a lot of ways. It had been around longer, it had better talent, it had more organization, it had more financial support. And when I read it, I really loved it. Well, many years after I left Iowa City, I came back to it, and not long after that, I saw The Icon close with very little notice. And I was not happy about that. I thought, my God, how could The Icon, of all things, be gone? Now all we have is the Gannett newspaper in town and a family-owned newspaper that was trying to break into Iowa City. But, by the way, I worked for Gannett for a while and learned that they really do undersell their ads, underprice their ads so that they can throw out the competition. And that's what they were doing until they got rid of a much better newspaper. Then I moved to State College, and I walked into a place and I picked up Voices of Central Pennsylvania. This was a few years ago. And I don't know, maybe it was a bad month, but I looked at it and thought, oh my God, is this the best that State College has to offer in terms of progressive activism? What's happening in our community? Well, you know, I've walked in those shoes now for a while, and I appreciate what's going on here. Voices is a work in progress, and it was founded by some very dedicated citizens in this community who knew that racists, bigots, homophobes, etc., could not go unresponded to, right? So, but it is all volunteer, and so it suffers the ebb and flow of quality and substance, I should say, that anything that's all volunteer does. If any of you have volunteered for organization, you know that you don't do it all your life, right? You kind of drop in, drop out, when you've got the time, when you've got the energy, new people come in, and you never really know what you're going to get. And so you work with what you've got. And what I tell Voices volunteers all the time is, whatever you do this month is more than would have been done. And for that, we should be happy. Because we are doing what Nancy and others have said, is we're making that difference. And we cannot change the world, but we can certainly change and improve this community. And what I realized was that my debt to Iowa City and all the people who spent their lives making that place better, and I know a number of them, and I've admired them for their endurance and their vision and their articulate ways of saying things. I owe them, because when I walked into Iowa City, that work had progressed so much farther. It was just, you could almost say it was done, but of course it wasn't, right? There's always more. And when I came here, we were just a little farther behind was all. And we just had that much more work to do. And so, thanks to my husband subsidizing my habit, I got involved with Voices, and much to the detriment of my freelance career, spend a fair amount of time running it, trying to run a business. I've never run a business before, except my little freelance business. So I have to learn how to talk to advertisers and what printing costs are and rental costs and managing volunteers. Most people who know me know that I'm not a naturally born diplomat. And so managing volunteers with a Turkish-Italian temper is something that's a personal challenge. But, you know, as I remind Art often, I'm growing, and in more ways than one, but I am growing. So every day that I meet this challenge, I think we've done a good thing. And so my media activism is very, very close to home. It's being active in the media because Nancy and Elizabeth, who's rapidly becoming my role model and getting up to hero pretty quickly, and all these other folks here, all the good work they do could be silenced like that. And one thing that motivated me when I moved here was this incredible, insidious communications campaign that was going on in the CDT by the, shall we say, they call themselves pro-lifers, right, who were making women who had abortions sound like real criminals. And when I tried to write to the CDT, it couldn't get in. It didn't get in. It never got in. And I never got a response. Now, I was an opinion page editor, so I know how that works, okay? I know all the ins and outs of it, every single bit of it. So there's no excuse. And why? You know, why wouldn't that get in? So most opinion page editors like a little life, actually, on their page. But for some reason, this wasn't going to make it. Your work wouldn't get in. Your work wouldn't get in. You know, no matter what riot you could cause based on some social injustice, if the folks who own McClatchy or Knight Ridder don't want it out there, it will be quieted, okay? It may not be silenced, but it'll be thrown on page 36 of the sports section or something, you know. So without this little stepchild of media in State College, there are a lot of people, I think, here who would not have had their voice heard at all. And it is a work in progress, so I invite people to join it in any capacity and help build it into a true alternative voice, a voice that only answers to the community, a voice that is diverse because that's the right thing to be, because that's what our community is, not because if you're not diverse, you won't sell the right ads, which is what Gannett does, by the way. I went to their diversity training, and it was pretty insulting, even to a white person. And I say that have a vision that in a couple of years, maybe 4 years, maybe 6 years, that this newspaper, whether it's in print or online, will be the paper that people come to find out what's really going on in the community. That when progressives move to the community, they know where to go to find other people like them. They don't feel so alone. But also, when the CDT, for instance, I'm sorry, they're the target, but they're the paper here, right? When the CDT prints a story about the number of jobs created in the last 5 years, this is a story, a very competent reporter came out recently, right? The number of jobs created in the region in the last year or 5 years. Somebody will bother to ask what those jobs pay, right? Nobody's bothered to ask what those jobs pay. So we lost Corning, we got what? Sweet Tooth Bakery, okay? So there's not really equivalent here, right? That's what we're trying to do with Voices. It is media activism in the most grassroots, most concrete way. And truthfully, I'm talking a little bit to the choir. So I just want to say thank each one of you who are already involved one way or another, and invite the rest of you to get involved as little or as much as you can. And someday we'll make this newspaper sustainable. We might actually get people to give us enough money to pay someone to do it, me or my successor, who's bound to be in the wings somewhere, and keep the democratic ideals of our country alive in a very concrete way right here in Center County. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two speakers who have come up from out of town, Philadelphia, am I correct? And we want to welcome them to the community, and they're doing work nationally but also for Pennsylvania. And to explain what they're doing, I'm going to invite them to come up here. First, Joel Kelsey is the grassroots coordinator for Consumers Union, the wonderful folks who bring us consumer reports. And I think that those of us who are making purchases certainly are consulting their unbiased opinions about what's best for us. So, without further ado, please welcome Joel.
Thanks. Hi. Since the theme of the day seems to be kind of talking about our experiences with local politics and then fusing it with media, I'll try to awkwardly combine the two. My name is Joel Kelsey. I got my start in local politics while I was still a student. I hail from New York, and I started out at a college called New Paltz, which is in New York's Hudson Valley. And I got my start working and fighting with a number of students on campus against General Electric, which is kind of this large multi-billion-dollar corporation throughout the United States. And they had been dumping for years and years, both before it was illegal and after it was illegal, what's called PCBs into the Hudson River, which is just nearby our campus. Does anybody know, any chemistry majors know what PCBs are? Oh, really? I'm alumni. Exactly. Polychlorinated biphenyls. They're a fire retardant that General Electric would use to pack their transformers to keep them from overheating and starting fires. They also cause cancer. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, they were banned by the EPA. Unfortunately, after that, General Electric continued to dump them into the Hudson Valley. And we, at the time, this is 99, 2000, thought that it would be a good idea for them to clean it up and to pay for the cost of cleanup and protect the health of the people that lived in and around the Hudson Valley. Long story short, we were able to, on a shoestring budget, there was about 10 or 12 of us, we were able to strategically target a number of elected officials in the area and turn their vote or their voice through a number of different tactics, from something as easy as, on-campus letter to the editor drives and op-ed drives and, letters and emails and call-in dates to your elected officials, to something a little bit more sophisticated, like a press conference and a rally outside of an elected official's office, to something as radical, I don't know, maybe you don't think it's radical, as gate crashing a political fundraiser for an elected official. So kind of the whole spectrum of different tactics we employed to try and strategically pinpoint and target different voices from elected officials and public officials throughout the community, turn them over to our side, force the EPA, the federal EPA, to make General Electric come to the table and pay for all of the chemicals and toxic waste that they had dumped into our community. It was a huge victory. We did it with 10 or 12 dedicated students on a shoestring budget, and we turned a company that had been spending millions and millions of dollars throughout the Hudson Valley around, forced the EPA to hold them accountable, and ever since then I've been hooked. So that's my experience with local politics. And I guess the equation that I learned through that experience was that politicians and public officials are kind of like barometers, right? They respond to pressure. And it's up to us to force them into responding. And it's up to us to put the pressure on them and force them into responding. So I'd like to just quickly go over one of the things that Consumers Union is doing in conjunction with PennPIRG that Beth is going to come up in just a minute and talk about here in Pennsylvania. Just kind of give you an idea of a quick event that's going to be happening in Philadelphia, hopefully in late November, that you can sink your teeth into and maybe organize around. How many of you read the major daily paper in your community? Often, every day or 3 times a week. Okay. How many of you not only do that, or apart from doing that, also kind of go to alternative media sources to get your information? Great. And how many of you feel like the major dailies that you read and the local newspapers in your area and the local news channels, 11 o'clock news, truly represent the voice of your community and truly come out and talk about issues that are important to you and represent kind of a spectrum of diverse viewpoints that represent the community that they're reporting to? Anybody? Okay. Well, the rules that govern the ownership of those media markets are set by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. And one of the things that is going on right now is they're reconsidering the rules that govern who is allowed to own which media markets or which outlets, which different types of media in particular markets, right? Which companies are allowed to own radio stations? Which companies are allowed to own TV stations? How many TV stations? How many radio stations? Can they own both? And also the major dailies. And if history is any indicator, we're in for a little bit of a fight. The idea or the philosophy behind the rules that the FCC sets, or that we would hope is behind the rules that the FCC sets, is to create, and foster a marketplace of ideas that allows a community to participate in a debate, in a dialogue about the issues that are important to that particular community. A voice, a media, an independent, diverse media that represents many different voices throughout the community. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is when you allow a few companies to own many of the different outlets in a particular media market, those local viewpoints and those independent voices get squashed. We know it just through every day, turning on the 11 o'clock news and through the idea, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, if it bleeds, it leads, and things like that. And the FCC also knows it because they actually commissioned a report to figure it out. They commissioned a report and produced a report that said just that. If there's more local ownership in a media market, there's more local news. Unfortunately, they didn't like what the report said, and they kind of put it in a drawer, locked it, and threw away the key. And it took a leak within the FCC to leak it to Senator Barbara Boxer, who recently made it public. And so everybody kind of knows this. Everybody kind of has figured out that local ownership of media outlets means more local news, more independent voices in your community, and just a better overall experience, interactive experience with your community media. And so, like I said, they're now reconsidering the rules that govern who's allowed to own what. And if history is an indicator, it's going to be a bit of a fight. In 2003, they came out with pretty horrible, in our view, pretty horrible rules that lifted a number of different bans. Most important to us was the ban on cross-ownership that stopped a company from owning not only a number of the television stations in a particular media market, but also the major daily. So under their new rules, companies could own a number of different television stations, a number of the major radio stations, and also the monopoly newspaper in a particular media outlet. So, if you do the math, that means that one company is controlling a huge percentage of the news that you see through many different mediums every single day when you wake up throughout your day and then when you go to bed. And that becomes just kind of recycled news. And what you end up seeing is skeleton local newsrooms with only a few reporters that don't have the resources to commit to local stories. And like I said, recycled news stories that play over and over and over again on your television, on your radio, and on your monopoly, your major daily newspaper. So back in 2003 when they did this, the Supreme Court overturned those rules, sent them back to the drawing board, and now they're reconsidering the same rules. And they decided that this time, lucky for us, that they're going to listen to what the public has to say about it. And like I said before, one of the major things that I've learned throughout my entire career in advocacy and activism is that politicians and public officials are like barometers. They do respond to pressure, and this is our in. This is our small window. This is our ability to really influence the decision makers at the federal level and show them exactly how people in the community feel about local media and how much they really truly believe it represents them and their own voice. So one of the things that they're doing to hear from the public, the FCC, is they're holding both official and unofficial hearings. They just started holding unofficial hearings throughout the United States. The first one was in LA. Over 1,000 people came on October 3rd to 2 different hearings. The second one is going to be in Nashville. We don't really know when yet. It's going to be sometime mid-November. But what I'm here to talk to you about is we are planning on holding an unofficial hearing in Philadelphia. We've been doing this throughout the United States over the past 2 or 3 years. It's always had huge turnouts. We invite not only people to show up and rally beforehand and talk about and kind of show up and lend their voice, but also to testify and get their comments put in the public record and show the FCC exactly how they feel about their local media markets. And hopefully a few of the FCC commissioners will actually be there in attendance. So although it's not going to be an official hearing, it'll be an unofficial hearing. There'll be commissioners there. All of your comments will be entered into the public record. And the more people that we can get to show up and shout at them and say, this is exactly what our media looks like now. This is what it should be. How dare you consider making it easier for companies to consolidate? The better off we'll be. So I know that geography is a little bit of an issue because you're a few hours away from Philadelphia. But if you're interested in organizing students and your classmates around this and getting them to come down to Philadelphia, there's a very specific, easy equation. There's an easy strategy to go about doing it, whether you'd like to organize 10 people to come down or 50 or 60 people to come down. I can talk you through it. So at the end, I'm going to have a sign-up sheet on top of the table. If you're interested in it, come throw your name down, your contact information down, and we can talk about how to get started. Thanks a lot. That's my piece.
And our last panel speaker who will come up is Beth McConnell, who surprised us, and we're very pleased to have her here. She's the director of PennPIRG, which is the Pennsylvania Public Interest Research Group, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. As you heard, my name is Beth McConnell, and I'm the director of PennPIRG. I don't know, how many people have actually heard of PIRG or PennPIRG before? Good. It's a tough name for an organization, so I'm not surprised when a few hands go up, PennPIRG. To give you guys a little bit of background, PennPIRG, the Pennsylvania Public Interest Research Group, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan public interest advocacy organization. We have over 4,000 citizen members in Pennsylvania and are part of a national network of state PIRGs across the country that have about 500,000 citizen members nationwide. And what we do is when special interests are pushing policy in the wrong direction or are stopping good policies from being adopted that are in the public interest, we stand up and take action and get involved. We start with thorough research that comes from being that's objective and comes from being independent of any political party, of government, of any particular industry or special interest, come up with smart policies, creative solutions, and then advocate at every level of government, whether it's local city council, state legislature, or in Washington, D.C., organize citizens so that their voices are heard, and organize other organizations and coalitions so that we together can be more powerful than the special interests that are pushing policies in the wrong direction. I got involved with PennPIRG in 1993 as a fundraiser on our telephone outreach project. I became the clean air and energy advocate for PennPIRG in 1999 and moved into my role as a director of PennPIRG in 2002. Some of our top priorities right now are fighting for permanent, sufficient, and reliable funding for public transportation in Pennsylvania once and for all. So we're working on it, I promise you, but it's a little tough. Our second priority right now is to stop any legislation from moving in Harrisburg that would weaken protections for the public and consumers as far as state cable franchising legislation. I think you've heard a bit about that. And we're also working right now to pass legislation to protect consumers from identity theft by allowing you to freeze access to your credit reports so that would-be identity thieves can't get in and open fraudulent lines of credit in your name. So those are some of our top 3 priorities in Pennsylvania. And I just want to talk a little bit about the state cable franchising bill and also how we use advocacy and organizing and the media in order to win. I want to talk quickly about 3 big victories we've had recently and then talk about the cable franchising bill. So sometimes this stuff can get pretty overwhelming. You know, it's like you're going up against the drug companies who are making unsafe medicines, they're overpricing them, but you know what, they're pretty powerful. We're going up against insurance companies that are ripping off consumers and denying people access to health care that they need to survive. So how do you combine advocacy and organizing and media to win? A couple examples. Here in Pennsylvania, PennPIRG and a large coalition of organizations took on Blue Cross and Blue Shield, the big insurer in the state. They have a $6 billion surplus, that's billion with a B, in Pennsylvania alone, while over 1 million Pennsylvanians are uninsured and lack basic access to care. So we did a couple things. One is from the advocacy perspective, figuring out what's the right solution, what are the policies, what's the law, what are our opportunities to change that. From a organizing perspective, reaching out to other organizations to kind of get everybody on board, healthcare groups, legal groups, citizens groups, and then from a media perspective, embarrassing the heck out of the state insurance department, the governor, and Blue Cross and Blue Shield for their insensitivity to the problem of the uninsured. And we were successful at then getting the governor to finally convince the Blues to use tens of millions of dollars of their surplus to provide health insurance to 29,000 adults in Pennsylvania that were on a state waiting list for health care. We also stood up to the IRS. Some of you may have seen last year, the IRS proposed a shocking new policy that would allow your tax preparer, or H&R Block, to sell the entire contents of your tax return to another company so that they could market goods and services to you. One-stop shopping for identity thieves, and was quietly published in the Federal Register. No fanfare, no media coverage, no attention. We started with a front-page article in the Philadelphia Inquirer that eventually led to ABC World News Tonight, Nightline, 60 Minutes, I mean, you name it, eventually creating so much public pressure and media pressure on the IRS that they have so far backed off and not adopted that proposed regulation, so we protected consumers' privacy there. So these are, again, just some of the ways that we use a combination of policy and thinking what's the solution, and public pressure and media to draw attention to the issue and win, and that's what we're trying to do here in Pennsylvania with the cable franchising bill. It seems like over the course of the day, folks are pretty up to date on the cable franchising issue and the state bill, right? So I probably won't spend a ton of time talking about it. But just very quickly, for those of you that didn't attend any of the earlier sessions, the basic thing is this. When a cable company wants to come to town and offer video service to consumers, they need to negotiate with the local government what's called a video franchising agreement. And this is a way for local government to get some protections for consumers in the cable marketplace. Because after all, we're not just talking about how much it costs to watch reruns of The Sopranos. We're talking about access to news and information. We're talking about our local government channels. We're talking about high-speed internet and how we're able to compete and communicate in the global economy. And we're increasingly talking also about telephone service, as our old landlines are going the way of the horse and buggy, and everything's quickly moving over to VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol. So these are really important issues. So it's critical for local government to be an advocate for consumers, to be an advocate for citizens, and push for public interest policies. This is how we, again, have public access stations. It's, as Cynthia said, why we have build-out requirements across the state. The cable companies have to serve everybody in a municipality and not pick and choose just the wealthier areas. Now, unfortunately, as we know, Comcast is the only game in town in most parts of the state. That's bad for consumers. Rates rise 3 times higher than the rate of inflation. They have the worst customer service rating of any company ever measured, according to the University of Michigan's rating. I think it's the American Customer Service Index, if I'm getting the acronym right. I should also give them a little credit. They actually moved up to second worst in the last quarter, but they're still pretty much far down there. And all you have to do is watch a video of a Comcast technician asleep on somebody's couch to really know what we're talking about. And so, there's no question that consumers need competition in the cable market. We need better customer service, and we need relief from skyrocketing rates. So we're really excited to know that Verizon has this great new technology called FiOS, fiber optic service, that would allow them to compete with Comcast and offer video and high-speed internet and voice over one line, over a fiber optic line. They are, I guess I'd say slowly but surely, but I'm not sure that's accurate, deploying those fibers across the nation right now, including in Pennsylvania. And they are negotiating video franchise agreements with local municipalities quite successfully. They've already reached, I think, agreements with somewhere between 80 and 100 municipalities, all before they even actually have a video service to offer to consumers, before they can even flip the switch. But then, they don't really want to be subject to these requirements any longer. They don't want a local government telling them that they have to build out to low-income communities that can't afford $200 a month in triple play services. They don't want to have to build out to more rural communities where it, granted, is a little bit more expensive and difficult to reach every single home. But what they fail to recognize is that in exchange for using our public rights of way, our streets and our telephone poles and putting in their substations that are an eyesore in our community and having access to our homes and making quite a profit from selling their service, they have to give something back. And that's what these video franchise agreements are designed to do. But Verizon instead has turned to its allies in Harrisburg and argued that these video franchise agreements are such a huge barrier to competition. It's so awful. It's so difficult. You need to get rid of these local franchise agreements and replace it with one statewide agreement. And of course, that one statewide agreement, which they were very happy to, draft the language. Of course, it's very nice of them to do that. Doesn't contain any enough protections for consumers. Doesn't contain any requirement that they build out their network, and removes almost all power from local government and municipalities. So what's our job? It's our job as a nonprofit public interest organization. We don't take money from Comcast. We don't take money from Verizon to figure out and cut through all that propaganda and figure out really what is the policy. What should Verizon be forced to do and when? So what we did, and Ben in particular is extraordinarily helpful in analyzing the state legislation and figuring out again what's the problem with it, what does this word mean, and what will it do, and how can we change that, or how should we craft our own bill or fight against some of these proposals to protect the public. So we reach out to experts like Ben and experts at other national media policy organizations to figure out what the policy is. The second thing that we did is figure out how to talk about it. I mean, can you imagine knocking on somebody's door and trying to talk about cable franchising? I mean, it's a little heavy, it's a little hard to explain. Even the words build out, I mean, what does it all mean to people? So how can we craft a message that can be a soundbite on the radio with a reporter, that can be communicated with a legislator in the 30 seconds when you're walking down the hall with them on the way to a meeting, can go up on a website and people can read it in 10 minutes or 5 or 2 and kind of understand what you're talking about. And so that's what we did, crafted a message and how to talk about this, which was, consumers need relief from cable monopolies, and Verizon needs to play by the rules and protect consumers when they offer their video service. The second thing we then did is figure out, well, who has the power, who are the players here that have the ability to decide what moves and when. So clearly we know that there's a majority leader and a speaker and all that sort of stuff, but the sponsors of the bills, who do they listen to? What organizations do they respond to? Who are they close to? And one of the things that we realized here is that local governments and municipalities, the very ones who would lose their authority under this bill, were an incredibly valuable ally for us. We needed to work with them, needed to be on the same page with them, and we needed to make sure that they didn't cave and give up their rights and some of these important principles. We then needed to build our coalition. It can't just be PennPIRG and the municipal governments and Consumers Union. It needs to be a lot more than that. So we've reached out to a number of organizations, both in Pennsylvania and nationally, to bring them on board, and so that we have a more unified voice. And then need to generate public support. I mean, thanks to the great work of Consumers Union and Free Press and MoveOn.org and a number of other groups, were able to generate what I think were, if not hundreds, may have been 1,000 or more emails, and certainly a bunch of phone calls also into legislators the day before they were scheduled to actually vote on these bills. We succeeded then in getting these bills pulled from the calendar. They weren't eventually voted on because of the pressure and the opposition from all of these groups, but they're still pending in both the State House and Senate, and so we're keeping our eye on them. The next thing we did is direct advocacy and direct lobbying. It's great for legislators to get phone calls from constituents, but we need to be in their offices every day, not only to articulate our concerns, but also find our allies. Which legislators are there because they want to work with us. They want to give us information. They want to tell us what Verizon is saying. They want to tell us what the strategy is from the other side. So we're able to learn a lot from that advocacy, both with our allies and then sometimes with our opponents. We want to know what messages and that they're using as well. And then we need to win the public argument. It's not just a debate in the Capitol. That's really not where these decisions are made, even though they cast their votes there. Where the decisions are made are in our local communities. If a legislator is being criticized because he or she is sponsoring a bill that's not in the public interest in the local paper, or an editorial is running that says really no bill should move unless it contains these provisions for build out to protect consumers, that's a way for us to win the public debate and win the public argument and be more successful in our advocacy. And then the last step that we're at now is realizing that the best defense is a good offense. We succeeded in stopping the bill from moving forward during this part of the legislature, at least before the election. We feel pretty confident it won't pass because it's just way too awful of a vote, I think, for legislators to make because they know that the public opposes it. But really, we're concerned about what's going to happen after the election during what's called the lame duck session, where there's not accountability is not so much. But then in the new session, how do we then pull back from just trying to kill a bill, but offer good, positive ideas? What should a state franchising bill look like? What should a strong build-out requirement look like? How can we get net neutrality in Pennsylvania if Congress refuses to do it? How can we protect our public access stations? So we're working now with lead legislative champs to draft language that we can then introduce in the new session and say, this is the public bill, this is the consumer bill, and this is the bill that legislators should be sponsoring and pushing. So that's our thing. Just to quickly wrap up, I think what you can do, I don't think it can be said often enough, call and write and meet with your elected officials, your state senators and state representatives. That one phone call that you make is vastly different than one email that you send, and is vastly powerful in a place like Harrisburg where they're hearing a lot from the lobbyists and they need to hear from you. You can also use the media, write a letter to the editor, to your local newspaper, to not only express your point, but also criticize them if they're not covering this issue. And connect with your local officials. Again, these are incredibly powerful people right now that are allowing us to ensure that consumers don't get the shaft in this legislation. So your town council, your local mayor, your local elected officials can be really valuable in making sure that that stays true. So reach out to them if they're not involved, or even if they are involved, so that they know that you support what they're doing. And I think finally, as with certainly, I would think many of the organizations up here, we always need volunteers and interns. So if you want to get more involved and more active in calling local activists or helping to, inside the organization with strategy and sometimes folding stuff and putting it in envelopes, sometimes calling legislators and scheduling meetings, organizing events locally on campus, we can always use your help. So we would love to talk to any of you that are interested in an internship to work with PennPIRG on these or any other issues. So I know I talked really fast, but hopefully I got through it all and wrap up there. I guess that's it.
Now we get to put Ben in the position of respondent for once. He'll have an opportunity to, I think he had mentioned to me earlier, a couple of short comments, and then we want to open it up to you and your reactions, concerns, questions. Ben Scott. Thanks.
Wow, that was great. I couldn't help but thinking of an experience I have every morning when I go to work. I live in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and I drive about 10 minutes to a giant commuter parking lot to get on the train to ride into the city. And every day there's somebody who gets there about a half an hour before I do, and their car is always parked as I walk by it and has a bumper sticker that says, "If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention." And after listening to this panel, I think I'm going to get myself a bumper sticker that says, if you're not inspired, you're not paying attention, because what you've just witnessed here is this is what democracy looks like. And I can't say it any other way. From my point of view, as a national advocate, as a consumer lobbyist working in Washington, when I sit down at the table with the Verizons and the Comcasts of the world, there are only so many things I can bring. And to borrow a metaphor from our friend and colleague Jorge Schmidt, who phrased it so well yesterday, legislators are motivated by fear and lust. Now, I don't have a big bag of money to bring to the Capitol building, so lust is kind of out. So what can I bring? Well, what I can bring is, as a public interest advocate, is the possibility that organized people might show up at the door of the legislator that I'm talking to. That's fear. I don't like it. A lot of legislators don't like it, even if you come and show up at their door to thank them for doing something, because they're so afraid that you're there to criticize them for doing something, because they're so unused to seeing you. Now, over time in the media reform movement, we have demonstrated on a number of occasions the ability to organize people and have them show up outside of legislators' doors. And if you can produce the bodies, the fear of the public continues to be a force in legislative and regulatory affairs. They're producing the bodies. My work in Washington is only as good as their work in State College, as their work in Philadelphia, as their work in Harrisburg. Our work as a society is only as good as we make it. So what I want to leave you with, I won't respond to everyone because there are so many good ideas and so many good things going on, is the commonalities that I see in the activist activities are these. Number one, the first thing you have to do in a local public is make people aware of the problem. Number two is you educate them about what are the possible solutions to that problem. And then you try to get them active. Activists are active once. The next step after activism is engagement. Engagement is continued activism. There is no word for continued activism except citizen. And that's what we're really trying to build here, is better citizens to make better government by producing the bodies over and over and over again until our legislators once again believe that democracy functions as it was intended. It's the voice of the people being channeled through their elected officials in the Borough Council of State College, in the state legislature in Harrisburg, and in the U.S. Congress in Washington. And I'm sure all of the organizations here have materials. I have brought some materials for free press. What we do at a national level is try to synthesize all of the complexities of communications policy into handy tools that you can use in your community for the first steps in the equation of awareness of the problem and education about how to solve it. I've got some media policy guides, some activism guides, and some generic literature up here. Feel free to grab it afterwards. And we also encourage everyone to work with your local communities. We decided early on that the best actors in a local community were those who lived in that local community and knew who the people are, Elizabeth and Nancy, what the media channels are that can put out an alternative viewpoint, Cynthia and Susan, who their academic allies are on the ground, Michael and Kevin, and how to organize when it matters, when it counts, to get the job done in Harrisburg and in Washington with groups like PennPIRG and Consumers Union. It's not a complicated equation. And we all, every day, have the ability to make it happen. And it's in places like this, in rooms like this, that we really are witness to the inspiration of what is possible. And I'd like to leave it at that and open up questions, because I think this is where it's at.
Hello, folks. I'm one of these media people. Ooh, yes. I'm district manager for First Media Radio and Television here in State College, general manager of 3WZ Radio and TV. that is Channel 4 TV. And have, around the 1st of September, celebrated my 40th year in broadcasting, 40th year in media, which in an industry that started 86 years ago, I'm close to covering half of the lifetime of this industry. And I've seen a lot of things happen. It's very different today than it was in 1966. It was a much more regulated business than it was in 1966. By the way, I'm a dues-paying member of Free Press and want to encourage everybody else to toss in their $50. And also member of Center Media Values, and we see a bunch of us here today. So wear a number of hats. You, Scott. Pardon me? Ben Scott. Inspired me last night after the presentation. One of the things he said was think big. And it got me thinking about all of these problems. We tend to focus on the individual problems as they pop up. And right now, Beth, Joel, you were talking about specific problems where you're fighting against a movement to deregulate. Regulations are already in place. And in fact, if you go back 100 years or so to the Standard Oil Trust breakup, there was quite a movement in the last century against monopoly and oligopoly. And that held for 50, 60 years and then began to break up. And there has been this movement, particularly in the last 25 years, of deregulation, breaking down the regulations that were protecting us. That's what we have to fight. And thinking in terms of thinking big, it's not just fighting these problems as they occur. Again, this is the second or third time the FCC has tried to eliminate the ownership caps in broadcasting. Instead, we have to re-regulate, and we have to support a much broader movement. And of course, not just in broadcasting, but also in banking, in airlines, in the telephone business, all of the deregulation that has taken place since, 1980, 1975. It's important to know, though, that these things go in cycles. There have been periods of regulation, deregulation, and re-regulation, just in the course of the 200 and some years that we've had our country here. So the notion of re-regulating is not that radical, but we're fighting against big forces with a lot of money pushing deregulation. And all of you organizational people, very diplomatically have noted that you're nonpartisan, but this is a partisan issue. And right now, the folks supporting deregulation are in power. And we got to change that first.
Can I just make just a quick comment, just a really quick response? I think in addition to concern about deregulation, which is a really serious problem, we also have to be concerned about preemption, whether it's our media policies or environmental rules or consumer privacy. The state wants to take away the rights of the local governments to regulate, and then the federal U.S. Congress wants to take away the rights of the states to regulate, so that ultimately we deregulate and then we take everybody's rights to regulate away, and then we're really in deep trouble. And that's a very serious threat and very serious trend in public policy right now that we need to be aware of.
I just want to say something about the more general issues you were bringing up, and that is how do we create a broader movement? And a lot of it is about framing the issue. George Lakoff talks a lot about how do we stop using their frame and start using our frame, and I think that is one of the hardest things we need to do, is to talk about the common good, not talk about deregulation and all. He uses the example of tax relief. Just the word alone makes taxes look bad. How do we start talking about our frame in a way that sets the terms of the discourse and has a broader umbrella for everything we need to do?
Hi, I really don't have a question. I just wanted to comment on what Ms. Hahn was saying earlier. I'm from Moon Township, and you were saying that a lot of people don't appreciate their public access television.
That they don't have it.
I know.
In
And
Half
I'm going to
Moon?
address that too. But I know my boyfriend who was here earlier I have it at my house, and he doesn't. And I just wanted to let you know that I really do appreciate mine. And I would much rather turn that on at night at 11 o'clock and fall asleep to the nice music that it plays than listen to the commercials between TV programs and news bits that I've already heard. And especially in Moon Township in our school district, we just went through a big thing where we were going to rebuild our schools or not, and it's a lot of taxpayers' dollars. My entire family lives there and have all sent their kids to school there, so it really affects us, and I really love to watch the school board meetings and to know what's going on, and so just want to let you know that I really do appreciate it, and I am inspired, like everyone has been saying, because, like I said, my boyfriend does not have that, and it's very frustrating to be over there and want to watch something at my house, and so I'm just really glad to know what the problem with that was. I didn't know that that's the reason we didn't have it, so I'm very thankful that you told me that, and hopefully I can
Well, thank you very, very much.
something about it.
That is very encouraging. Thank you very, very much.
Let me just add a commercial. That there are 6 municipalities in the center region, only 4 belong to CNET. We still need, if you live in Ferguson Township, ask your supervisors to please join CNET. It's close, within probably one person, don't you think? One vote to get it. Half Moon also does not belong.
Oh, is it that side again? I can wait. Okay, sorry. My name's Cole Hans. I'm a local resident here for about 17, 18 years it's going on now. I work at Penn State in public information, Penn State outreach. So I'm a media person. I'm doing like podcasts and videos now as well as writing, do freelance stuff. I've written in Voices. I also write for the CDT, In the Belly of the Beast. I have my column, Notes from an Earthling. And I try and make people think about things while I entertain them. That's sort of, every time I try and teach them too much about something disturbing, I get a little slap down, but I still put it out there. Yeah. But I started a blog, and actually, Joel, is it Joel? You'll be pleased to know that in my blog I just mentioned the meetings out in LA that are going on. It was, Fight Big Media. So it's in there, but like you say, it's way buried deep in their little blog section. But if you ever go to the community blogs at the Center Daily Times, look at Earthling's blog, and you'll see some stuff. And I am a member of Free Press as well. And I thank you for being here. I was so pleased when I saw that this was happening. I got an email just yesterday, I think. But I did wanted to mention, if there's anybody here who's interested in trying to transition to a post-carbon world and is passionate about that, please try and get in touch with me. You can look me up at Penn State. My real name's Christopher Hans. There's no secret. It's good to have a couple names if you have to, disappear quickly. But seriously, CMH103 at psu.edu, because I won't be able to hang out here very long. CMH103 at psu.edu. And Elizabeth, we have to get together because Laura Silver has been trying to connect us.
Yes, I know. We're going to hopefully launch a
right on.
organization.
We're having our 3rd meeting tonight, as a matter of fact. We're meeting every other week. I've got a local citizens group. Our big issues are moving to a post-carbon world. And even deeper beyond that, to speak to what Nancy was saying, if you want to frame an issue, because I was in marketing before I got into public information. Well, I was in music and then marketing, and it's a weird, wonderful world. But to frame the issue, to me, a lot of these things really boil down to one central theme, and that is people before profits. because so much of what we're seeing, so many things that so many people are battling in so many different arenas, really boil down to where are our values? As Americans, as human beings, as global citizens, what's really important? You know, human health and welfare, or the bottom line? And to me, that's the essence of all these battles. And if you want to frame an issue, that to me is the essence. So I'd say carry that in your hearts. But thanks for being here.
Hello. My name is Ada Houston. I'm a student here at Penn State. I'm a journalism major. And I've been listening to you guys, and I'm really been interested in what you've been saying. And I feel like, nobody here is someone who wants to be manipulated. And that's kind of what you're fighting, is being manipulated by government and by organizations and everything. And I've heard you talk about how newspapers and TV stations will not publish what they do not want to hear, and that we're supposed to correct this, but that also there's publications like Voices and CNET that are out there trying to get that done, but they're either threatened or it's kind of wobbly at the moment. I just wanted to know, where can I go? Where can we go to get this information? I mean, I'm not from here. I'm from Westchester. I'm third year here. I don't have a TV in my room. Where can we go to get help?
Maybe one place to start would be with Michael, and Michael, your plans to create a union website or other resource for community activism and media activism in the area. Could you maybe talk about that?
I'll say a couple of points on that real quick. Again, there'll be more information, but my hope is that this is only the start of something. These people are doing tremendous work. I'm new to the community, and there are many of you who are students here who as well are touched by these issues, but have never had them addressed in your work or have never really been personally linked to some of this. My hope is to begin to develop sort of a media activism component to our curriculum, and to get us linked to the community, the campus linked to the community linked to the state, and to begin to see the efforts and endeavors that are going on here more widely publicized, more incorporated, so that we feel that we are a part of a connected community, as you say, a hot community, and engage in the issues to raise these questions from people like yourself who say, okay, I'm about to take off now on a career track, I care about these issues, I also have other concerns, but where do we negotiate and navigate that? I'll say this in closing real quick, and that's the sense of, I'm going to put out cards here because we don't have a website established yet. We don't have a presence that we can call your attention to. I mean, primarily it's myself and Kevin and other people in the College of Communications who have really, really drawn upon this. I'll ask you to take a card. I'll ask you to take another card that you can write your name down on. We will build it. It will take time, but we will build it. And in terms of now where you can get information, the people right in front of you here. These are resources that are in the community, and they are more than willing to assist you in your education, and they're willing to hear from you so that they can answer your needs.
If I may, not just a self-serving plug, but volunteer, get involved, and this is your time to do this. This is the time when maybe you can afford a few hours a week to get the kind of experience that will inform your life later, in terms of whether any of this is really true, or you walk out of college in another year and you say, those guys were flakes over there in State College, man, right? But if you get down and dirty with it, volunteer at CNET, volunteer on an election campaign, volunteer at Voices. There's nothing quite like having to deal with the reality of paying the printer, right? Which is something that most progressive people do not want to hear about when they hear about Voices. But we have to have advertising to pay the printer and the rent, right? And that's the nitty-gritty that many idealists and folks, they don't want to hear about it, and they don't want to know about it. The people before profits, yes, but not here, not now, not yet. We have those values, but we have to operate within a system that doesn't believe in those values yet. And so how do we do that? How do we survive long enough to win? And so I invite you to get involved with anybody here. We've all got work to do that would help you gain access your own way to the information you're seeking.
Thank you very much.
I just want to mention while we're plugging, tomorrow night Bill Moyers has a special on. He's been doing Moyers on America this month on all the telecom issues. Watch it with others, and we've set up through the National Issues Forum a citizen school, a link on his pages, so you can go in and have dialogue on this issue. So get other people you know to watch it with you, and get online and actually interact on these issues.
On that point, actually, if you're watching Bill Moyers tomorrow night, go on the PBS website afterwards. There will be a live online debate between myself and Mike McCurry, who, if you don't know, Mike McCurry is the former press secretary for Bill Clinton, so I'm going to need all the help I can get. I think before we move on to another question, I hope you'll all join me in thanking Professor Michael Olafsky, who organized this entire symposium. Really has been the driving force.
I'd like to give them an all opportunity, and then we'll wrap it up, and you can come and see the propaganda. So we'll take these last three.
Hi there, John Dickinson, local person. I've been involved in lots of media projects, and I know some of y'all here, but if I could just summarize the thing, I liked everything I heard tonight, by the way. If I could just summarize what was said, because I think these were all good takeaway ideas, and hopefully you will not mind my paraphrasing of what it is you said. Run for office. Speak up and organize, and then speak up. Protect your assets, your communications assets. Make real your commitments with hot commitments. And if you are an academician, the ethical thing is that you have no choice but to be an activist. Volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. And what you do is more important than if you did nothing. In other words, if you don't feel like you're doing enough, if you did something, that's more than what would have been done. Super important. And to create pressure for public officials to have them respond, and to organize the resistance to the disproportionate amount that the bigger voices have and the private voices had, and create media pressure on them. I think those are all super good goals. I've been a media practitioner for a long time, and one of the things is our sort of professional code of ethics is you can't wear a campaign button, you can't belong to stuff. And I've covered 1 million councils, and I've covered 1 million sports events and church events and that kind of stuff, and spelling bees, yeah. If you're feeling like you can't belong to something because of your media credential, find something you can belong in that won't conflict with your media credential. Because my life right now that I'm out of mainstream media is much richer because I'm involved in other community things. And I think the term activist has a certain smell that Fox News propagates as a bad smell. And that being an involved person in your community, whether that's the fire department, the township board, the recycling people, crunchy or whatever, do it, because that's what's going to make your life more rich. That's what's going to allow you to connect with people like this that are energetic instead of apathetic. And you will find the kinds of things that you're looking for media-wise, because people like this will point you there and say, hey, check this out. And you don't have to suffer with the mainstream media that's spoon-fed, it's easy to find Fox News. It's hard to find voices. And it's easy to write for voices, and it's hard to get a job at Fox News. So, Journey School kids, voices.
John, was it? Yeah, being an activist in terms of trying to create an engaged and informed citizenry is something that I think is really lovely and doesn't smell bad at all. And my name's Melanie Dobler. I'm with Penn State Public Broadcasting. Thanks for the Bill Moyers plug. And last week was Moyers on America with the evangelical movement and environmentalism. It was outstanding. I'm here because I think Penn State Public Broadcasting is a university licensee. Of the public television stations across the country, 1/3 of them are licensed to universities, and there's a unique connection there in terms of public service media.
And it's something that Ted Krischels, our general manager, has a passion about. We are engaging more with the university and hoping to kind of create energy around the commitment to engagement and engaged communities. So I am excited to be here. I think that I'm looking forward to working with a lot of you in a lot of different ways. And I just wanted to thank everybody for having us, and thank you, Michael.
So the question I have, obviously we're all here because we're passionate about issues. But how do you maintain that passion? How do you keep that passion fresh without becoming bitter? I mean, because when we start looking at things and saying, am I really making that impact? Am I making the difference that I set in to do? And you start getting, the essentially the setbacks. How do you maintain that passion? How do you continue on that same path?
I used to be a union organizer. I got to tell you, that's a painful job, right? We lose 9/10 of every fight we fight. And when we lose, people lose their jobs. It's not just, what can sometimes feel like an obscure regulation. It's watching people go home without a job anymore. And I know union organizers who have survived 20 or 30 years, and I don't know how they've done it. Well, actually, a lot of them are drunks, to tell you the truth. They really are, because it takes its toll on you. I landed in the ER and said, okay, this job's killing me, so I'm out of here. I took 3 years off, and the people in the movement around me said, it's okay, you deserve a rest, you'll come back. And I didn't believe it at the time that I would go back to doing anything ever again. I was so exhausted and so burned out. And I looked at people around me who were still doing stuff, and I thought, I don't know where they came from, but I don't have it in me. But then something clicked. I came here. There was work to be done. There were generous people who had lived here for many years willing to help, and that love and compassion came through and fed me. Kevin Hagopian helped run a discussion group. I'm not one to ever recommend a book. I have a horrible time getting through books, but this one was incredible. It was the most inspirational thing I've ever read in my life, called The Impossible Will Take a Little While. Rather short essays by some very famous people, including Nelson Mandela and a lot of other great people I admire, about the moment they were in, when they were in the middle of it and never knew that they'd get out of it, right? And they capture that moment and what kept them going. I recommend it to everyone who's trying to figure out how to keep going, especially in this atmosphere of this current administration.
I'll come at that from a little bit of a different angle. I think number one, it's important not to internalize any defeats that you have. That's a big thing. We all will experience defeats at some point in our life, and once you internalize it, I think it takes a much larger toll on you. But I think we all have different ways of keeping that kind of fire burning inside, kind of that passion to keep attacking the issues every day. Personally, I get it from other activists that I work with, and just the rhetoric and just the articulate ways that they're able to express their issues and their views. And the way that I wanted to just quickly mention that to you is there's I'm stealing this from a guy named Saul Alinsky, who wrote a book called Rules for Radicals, which is a great book you should all read. And one of the things he mentions is, when you're working on a college campus or anywhere in a community, and you're trying to motivate the people that you're trying to get to help, to volunteer, to work with you, always pick an issue. And whenever you pick an issue, paint it black and white. Right? Paint it black and white. There's angels and there's demons. They're the demons, we're the angels. We're trying to do something great here. And don't be afraid to use rhetoric when you're trying to inspire people. There's a reason that, our Declaration of Independence doesn't start out by saying, we're a bunch of rich guys and we don't want to pay taxes anymore. And there's a reason that it starts out saying that, and it talks about freedom. And, there's a reason that it uses rhetoric. A call to war isn't something that is bogged down with nuance. So think about that when you're trying to inspire others. But just from my own personal perspective, I kind of rely on the other people that I work with to keep me going on a day-to-day basis. So.
Okay. If you'll allow me just 2 minutes, please, to put a frame around this. I'll just add 2 cents to what I've seen. When I get really depressed, I think about what Ben does every single day. And I only think that, talk about putting a smile on my face immediately. All I have to do is come to class and teach and talk about these issues with people who, thankfully, are very much interested in that. I mean, that gives me hope. And what also gives me hope is when I take a look out here, and yeah, I know many of the students are here for extra credit, but nonetheless, you stayed here, and many of you came 2 and 3 times. And when you came I get hope for the future, honestly. And, of course, the people in the community. So, in closing, I just want to thank you guys, because I think, for me, this is what's inspired me. We've had 3 really successful events. Ben's visit here has been, I think, a wonderful visit. He's been to 5 classes and 3 public events such as this in less than 48 hours. And when he said to me, he said, just get me coffee and keep me going. And he's done it, and we really appreciate that. Some other people we really appreciate for bringing this to fruition: Doug Anderson, Anthony Oliver Sola, and the College of Communications, the Don Davis Program in Communication Ethics, and the Rock Ethics Institute. Deborah Cheney, is Deborah still here? She is the University Librarian connection for us. Her help has been invaluable. Also, I'd like to call attention to Erica Polson, who is the co-coordinator of this. Again, she's been tremendous in helping to make this roll as smoothly as it has. Ben Scott, obviously, and the panelists today. This is all recorded, so we'll be able to hear this again if we want to. CNET and Media Sites Live for covering it, and most of all to you guys for coming. Thank you very much. This is not the end. If you're interested in hearing more, take my card, write down your name, pick up the propaganda that is back here. I'm all for it. Hey, it's information that we'd like you to have. That's the important thing. Thank you again for your patience and your participation.